welcome to the program. This is Ecomodernist Channel Live. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Gabe Ignetti, Chris Bergen, and our special guest. Mike Conley is bringing us his latest work, the LNT Report. He was just telling us, no, don't talk too much about my book.
Yeah, I didn't want to be wagging a copy at the camera. That's a little too on the nose. You guys do that.
Well, yeah, we will, because we are here for it. And Mike, you've given so much to the pro-nuclear community. Authored Earth is a Nuclear Planet. Check out Generation Atomic Press. Find it on Amazon. Find it anywhere that we can possibly get that material. Incredibly important work written with retired engineer Tim Maloney, and Roadmap to Nowhere debunks the claims of Mark Z. Jacobson for a 100% wind, water, and solar powered America by what did he first say? 2035? Isn't
He
time...
first came out with his program he's looking at a 30-year program, basically mid-century,
But he's been saying 30-year program for 20 years now, right?
Well, yeah, he's it's like fusion, Yeah. I'm just kidding.
It's just over the corner.
I think actually fusion is much more workable than a national wind and solar program. I don't know if you've been following this stuff with the spark reactor, Commonwealth Fusion out of MIT. My money's on them.
Very hopeful.
Because they have the Repco magnets and they have enough Tesla to do what they want to do. So anyway.
That's exciting. But you can tell us more about this great evil that will stop all nuclear development, the great evil, and that is the idea that radiation is going to poison humanity for all time and space, and it's going to absolutely make any nuclear solution, fission or fusion, unworkable. Is that true, Mike? Is that the fact?
No. It's amazing how this came about, because when they were studying this stuff in the 1920s, low dose radiation wasn't on anybody's radar. They just weren't even figuring or thinking about low dose radiation. The whole thing was, oh my God, high dose radiation, how dangerous is it? But the flawed experiments in the 20s led to the wrong conclusion that there is no safe dose. And it is just completely and utterly not true and provably false, and the idea persists. It's nuclear fear is what it is.
Do you blame people for initially those first 4 or 5 years assuming that there was a linear line?
Yes, that's the basis of the bad science, or what I abbreviate as BS.
Would you blame them?
I don't blame them for thinking it's a possibility, but the null hypothesis should have been there's no effect here, now let's see if there is, instead of there is a bad effect here and now we need to verify it. And so there was a fundamental bad judgment back in the beginning. They found linear effects at high doses. That means if the dose is 1,000, the effect is X. If the dose is 2,000, the effect is 2X. If the dose is 500, the effect is half X. They found that at high doses. And then they went, well, let's just draw a line straight down to zero and assume that the same relationship called proportionality or linearity happens in low doses. And it's like, why would you assume that? I've never found the rationality expressed as to why they would assume that, other than, well, just to be safe, we should assume this because it's dangerous at high doses. And so we just better be safe and assume it's dangerous at low doses until we find out that it's not, which is the flip of what it should be. Is now let's see if it applies in low doses. We don't know if it does, and be neutral about it instead of presuming that there is a deleterious effect at low doses and then proceed from there. It's like the reporter that decides what the story is before he goes out and interviews people. So yes, I consider it an egregiously bad, it's BS, it's bad science.
Well,
It's just
It
that
was
simple.
an assumption, I think, that it's a
Yes.
simple assumption to make, and they were thinking about other things that took a lot of brain power. And so they said, well, this thing we don't need to worry about now. Let's just assume the simple thing that it goes right down, all the way down to zero through background
Mhm.
radiation. And that was that turns out was a huge mistake. I mean, we know that other things like alcohol, we've known for thousands of years. A little bit of alcohol isn't dangerous, but a lot can be very dangerous and even kill you. And we have known that as a
Yeah.
species, I think, for a few thousand years.
Yes, and Paracelsus formalized the knowledge in 1538. And where he basically said it's the dose that everything has poisonous qualities, it's the dose that make the poison. And what we point out in the book, if you drink 2 gallons of water in one city, you're going to die. Water is basic to life, but too much of a good anything is bad. The fact that that is not applied to radiation is just bizarre.
we do hear this argument of, oh, it's some things are poisonous and you can have no amount of exposure. And also we hear misinformation based on this. Like the idea that carbon dioxide can't be a problem because it doesn't affect us at low doses.
Yeah, these absolutisms are just unscientific. Correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, there's no other field of science, extrapolative assumption, if for lack of I just made that up. What other field of science does that? I'm serious. That's not a rhetorical question. What
Even
other
math.
field of science
Yeah.
or investigation goes, oh, we found bad stuff at high doses, therefore there's probably the same relationship at low doses.
Do you ever hear Peltdown Man?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Peltdown Man. I'm pretty sure Peltdown Man is the way I'm saying it.
Sound. Yeah.
Yeah. In Britain, they found this skeleton of what was supposedly the original first Homo sapien, and it was found in Britain. And the science actually took that on and believed it for quite a while until it was exposed as a hoax. So these things do happen. In the 1930s, they were teaching eugenics. So these things do happen in science, but they get corrected over time. And this is one of them. This is the same kind of thing.
The concept of it must be linear down all the way down to zero. Nothing in nature is linear all the way down to zero.
And in math, zero is simply a known discontinuity for many equations. It's all about your boundary conditions anytime you do anything in math.
Well, the difference between the four of us is that Mike's the only one that started writing this stuff down and taking notes and reaching out to people in a
Yeah.
in a certain way to create this book. The LNT report. Now, Earth is a nuclear plant, but LNT report's just released a few days ago from this recording. Amazon's showing it number 4 in nuclear engineering overall, number 16 in nuclear physics overall, and there's a new nuclear engineering book. It's number 1. That's a really, really tiny thing.
That's good.
But it's doing fairly well. It's making some sales.
I just wrote it in narrative form, as if it were a true crime novel or a true crime story to keep the people turning the page because it's a complicated issue. So you have to bring a dramatic flair to the subject and turn it into a storytelling thing rather than here's the facts because nobody will read the damn thing. Screw erudite. Nobody reads erudite. And so I just applied my writing chops to telling what Ed Calabrese has discovered and putting it in date, order, and narrative form to make it a page turner so people can get a general sense of what the hell this is about. It's a super, super important subject. Which is unfortunately technical, and there's a couple of key technical points that unravel the whole thing, but you got to lead up to it to explain it, and so it can't be done in a paragraph, although I will try if you ask me right now.
Yeah. About how many pages is LNT report? Because if you just listed out a factual point, could have been done like 10 or 12 pages, maybe, but
Yeah,
very
it's
dry.
140 pages. Yeah, because I tell the whole history,
Right.
It's like this guy is in 1927, he's doing this, he's working with this guy, and this is what he said, and then he has no data to this. I mean, this story is amazing. Herman Muller comes up with this hypothesis, and he presents it in a paper as a conclusion with no data in the paper at all. None, zero, nothing. And people buy it. And them's that don't buy it get shouted down.
I've never heard of that happening before, honestly.
It's right there in his 1927, or it's right not there in his 1927 paper. Here's this landmark paper that shook the world, and there's no data. It's all, we did this and we concluded this, and so there.
And the follow-up studies was mysteriously wrong.
Yeah, so Mueller in the years afterwards tried to establish data, and he couldn't do it. And he had other people working on it, and they couldn't do it. And thems that apparently did it, you look into their studies, is like, well, why did he do this? Well, why did he do that? Well, that's not standard science. And so there's a lot of really basic fundamental things. For example, in one of the fruit fly experiments, this guy, Warren Spencer, I can't remember, I think that's the guy's name, Spencer, he zapped the flies at different rates of radiation for different lengths of time and threw all the results into one bin rather than separating it out. Well, when we did it for an hour, this happened. When we did it for 5 minutes, this happened. He threw it all together, which invalidates the experiment. And there was like basic stuff like that going on. There's a guy in England that attempted to duplicate Mueller's stuff, and Mueller was guiding him. And the guy, he didn't have his temperature controls. It was a winter in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he had these incubators of flies in the hallway in the winter, and others were in the lab, and he didn't separate the flies with lead shielding. So when he zapped these guys, the guys 10 feet away were probably getting zapped, et cetera. It was just like, And so if you just listen to the scientists and go, well, we found this and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. Well, then you look at what they did, is like, why would that make you conclude what you just said?
There's something going on, and you earlier alluded to this taking on a bit of an exciting sort of true crime narrative.
For a dramatic flair, it's the attempted murder of nuclear power.
If anyone here has seen the wonderful film Nuclear Now, we get a hint of the motive. Like, what are the means, the opportunity, other motives, other collaborators? Sure. What's the landscape here?
Well, see, that's the thing. You start getting into something that people would instantly call a conspiracy theory, although all this is documented. Mueller's work was pretty much financed and supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. Okay? Not initially at the beginning. At the beginning, he was a post-grad at Columbia doing work on the whole thing was, how do we induce genetic mutation in offspring? And if we can induce genetic mutation in offspring at will, then we can probably determine how evolution came about. It would unlock the secret of evolution. And so this whole thing began not as oh my God, radiation is dangerous, we need to show the world how dangerous it is. It was all about, well, hell, let's just cause genetic defects in fruit flies, and then we can probably unlock the secret of evolution. And Mueller was doing it with radiation. Other people were doing it with toxins, like, let's give them some more mercury and see what happens, And he was like, well, I'm just going to throw radiation at the poor little fruit flies, and then take a look at their kids and see how weird the kids look, and go, aha, when I gave them this much dose, the kids had green wings or whatever, And so that was Mueller's approach.
So,
and he finally got a breakthrough at 130 million times background dose.
Only 130. Okay. But I want to break this up. This is
Sure.
this is the true crime aspect. So you're telling me the Rockefellers, they're just this evil organization. They're just evil for evil's. No, what is their motive? I want to hear, what is the Rockefellers' motive?
Rockefellers had, they had a ton of money, and what a lot of rich people did back in the 20th century is they did philanthropic works, like they built a library or a university, and the Rockefellers built a university, and I never saw them as like a bunch of Mr. Burns going, oh, we're gonna screw up the world, not at all. What happened is during the Manhattan Project, we were building the bomb, the Rockefellers. They had a big science foundation, and which became the Rockefeller Foundation, and they were lending support and help and knowledge to the Manhattan Project to build the bomb. And a lot of people in the organization were very against doing that and felt really horrendous when the bomb went off. And it's like, God, we helped that. Oh my God. We better start looking at radiation and seeing how dangerous it is, or if it's dangerous. It's obviously dangerous. Look what happened to the cities. We better explore this because we feel partly responsible. And so they did. But the problem is that the National Academy of Sciences at the time was run by a guy from the Rockefeller Foundation, Detlev Bronk. And you may or may not have heard of the name Detlev Bronk. He's actually very famous. And if you want to get into UFO lore, he's one of the Majestic 12. And the UFO people think that he was the guy that did the autopsies on the aliens at Roswell. And so all I'm saying about all that is Detlev Bronk was a very well-known, very, very, very highly respected scientist at the time. Okay. So anyway, he was running the NAS. And then Dean Rusk, of Vietnam War fame, was at the Rockefeller Foundation. He writes Eisenhower, he's like, we got to study this radiation stuff to see if there's how dangerous and if it's dangerous and all this other good stuff. And so they go to the National Academy of Sciences, is run by a Rockefeller guy. And then they get a guy named Warren Weaver, who is the guy who loans money to people from the Rockefeller Foundation. Oh, you're doing that work, here's $100,000 to go do it. That guy, he comes in, he picks all the guys who are going to be on the genetics panel at the National Academy of Sciences looking into radiation. And one of them, of course, is Herman Muller, who they have been financing throughout the 1930s, his research in Europe, his salary at University of Indiana. So the Rockefellers had not their thumb on the scale, but their presence was very pronounced in the whole thing. The mistake was forming a genetics panel that was all pro LNT, Muller's LNT hypothesis. They're called Mullerians, like Martians, The genetics panel was stuffed with people who agree with Muller. And Muller was trying to prove that there was danger in very, very, very low doses. And so it all kind of like leaned in that direction. And I don't think it was a Mr. Burns, like, we're going to push it in this direction. But it was kind of like, in the word conspire, to breathe together. They were all breathing the same air.
The threat of nuclear contamination, radiation, as a base level threat to human survival, is something that they all kind of inwardly worry about. And all of this came out of the era of eugenics.
Why are you tying it to eugenics? I mean, fill me in on that.
There's a big accusation that Muller was a eugenicist.
Oh, boys from Brazil thing?
Yeah.
No, he wasn't one of those guys.
But everyone thought, we need to protect the human species.
Interesting.
And so it is like the ancient traditions of flawed science and flawed medicine that were influenced by the attitudes of the day that became tradition, and tradition follows tradition and is never questioned once it becomes a fixed tradition.
Well, in Muller's Nobel Prize speech, he talked about the possibility that radiation is inimical to the existence and progress of humanity because of genetic damage. So he opened this Pandora's box of fear and genetic damage, and that falls right in with the eugenics concept of the perfectibility of the human genome. It's just sort of like a Star Trek ideal turned on its head. So point I'm trying to make is the people in the Rockefeller Foundation were genuinely concerned about the future of humanity and genetic damage because they were strongly influenced by this guy they funded that kept on saying all this stuff. And he was the international scientific rock star at the time. He won the Nobel Prize and all this other stuff. And at the same time, they were making billions of dollars selling petroleum. And so, in the back of their mind, if not in the front of their mind, they realized that nuclear power would be a threat to their profits. But I wouldn't reduce it to some simplistic thing. Oh, the Rockefellers, beat up on nuclear because they wanted to sell us oil. Life doesn't work that simplistically. And I don't see these people as cartoon characters at all. They're human beings. They were ambitious. They stumbled onto something they thought was correct and they pushed it. And then they got into this egotistical position of striving to be right rather than striving to be correct.
I love that. I want to remember that. Striving to be right rather than striving to be.
And that was the thing about Mueller.
Yeah.
Mueller was suppressing contrary evidence. And the problem is his Ted Honcho at, I think it was Rochester University, had his main PhD geneticist dude run an experiment to try to verify Mueller, and it did exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
It showed that there was a substantial threshold in the low dose range.
We could take everyone from Ralph Nader to RFK Jr., and they don't need to be doing this for malicious reasons, but simply for the purpose that they are striving to be right, not being self-critical, and striving to be correct.
Yeah.
Did I
striving to be right instead of striving to get things right? Or
did I run over your point, Chris?
A little bit.
Okay.
I'm just gonna say I've read a lot of I don't want to say literature, but science fiction from 1890s into the 1950s, and there's a fair amount of stuff about people trying to be better by mechanical or chemical means, the Invisible Man, and so many others, Frankenstein being put together, and
well, yeah, I mean, look at Spider-Man, got bit by a radioactive spider. Look at all the cool stuff he can do. In other words, that radiation can unlock the door but it's a double-edged sword because it's sorcery, because it's basically alchemy, because you're changing one element into another and you're splitting the fundamental building block of the universe. And this is some really, really basic, deep, fundamental stuff that can easily stir up a lot of atavistic fear. And so nuclear fear is not just built on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's built on all that stuff, on alchemists playing God. Because chemistry and nuclear power are two completely different things. Chemistry is just, putting molecules together, and nuclear is we're going to take this atom and make it into another kind of element. That's ooh, that's spooky. It is spooky, and it is alchemy, and it can be really dangerous and really unhealthy. Yeah. Can. C-A-N, not will, not must.
So that's the mythological demon, the Christian anti-archetype, the Christian
all
devil.
That stuff, man. Yeah. All that stuff. That's how deep nuclear fear goes. It's a deep, deep subject. And it isn't just about radiation. It's about the universe and alchemy and playing God and all those kind of things and death rays. And
scientists, they've gone too far.
Yes, exactly. And that really conjures that, it really does. And so the nuclear fear is understandable. I don't look at people going, "Ah, no, they're afraid of nuclear. They're idiots." It's like, no, I mean, that is a genuine fear.
Gabe, go ahead.
Yeah, perhaps a little pushback on this because it's really conjecture, and you're right about that point of whether Rockefeller Foundation's oil connections were involved
Mm.
in their motivation. However, that is the MO of big business and industry. It's just that's just a fact. I mean, the fossil fuel industry, they were paying out openly paying climate denying scientists. There was a movie called Tucker, a Man in His Dream about
But yeah,
yeah, about the how the automotive industry just suppressed a competitor who had a really superior car politically. And seeing all of this, I don't see how the fossil fuel industry, though it might not be the Rockefeller Foundation, but how the fossil fuel industry would not be involved in promoting this whole
oh,
thing.
I agree. I'm not, what I'm saying is it's not a
Yeah,
simplistic black or white Mr. Burns kind of a thing. It
yeah.
is, it's a very complex, layered issue, and these people breathe the same air, literally, in the boardroom. They conspire. They have the same viewpoint. Basically, the profit will make you think along certain lines. It's just, that's so yeah, I just don't see the Rockefeller Foundation as a cartoonish evildoer, but it's like this is what corporations do. They maximize profit and they eliminate competition. That's the
Mhm.
job of a corporatist.
Yeah.
It's just that simple.
And they won't necessarily experiment on their own. I think there's a good point here in that we saw the success of Greenpeace protesting against nuclear weapons.
Mm.
And then the corporate interests found that it was a ripe vehicle to drive nuclear energy fear and funded the hell out of the
Yeah,
Greenpeace Europe Foundation.
yeah. And there's a book coming out called The Poverty of Green Philosophy, and it's a Marxist view of all this stuff. And I'm not a Marxist. I'm a social democrat. But their idea is that if you run all this on a profit margin, people are just going to maximize profit and eliminate competition. And it was an easy thing to do with people like the Rockefellers of Shell Oil in the 50s. They had all the money, and nuclear didn't really. And so if you look at it purely in a business sense, of course they were doing that. But I don't think that was just only why they were doing it.
Yeah, I was gonna say let's just look a little bit more at your book, deeper in the book. It wasn't just the people from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. It was going into the 50s and 60s, 70s,
Hmm.
where people were getting things wrong, and this is a multi-generational thing. It's not like the next generation came, tried to replicate things as graduate or undergraduate students and said, "Hey, this is totally different." They kept covering up and not allowing proper science to be replicated going forward through the Bear committees, Bear 7, Bear 8, and then we have Physicians for Social Responsibility kicks off. Sierra Club switches from pro-nuclear to anti-nuclear in the early 70s,
Right.
and things just kept moving along in what we see as the wrong direction.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think they were building on each other's work rather than verifying the work and building from there. It's like, Mueller comes along with his BS about there's no safe dose, and people take that as a given and proceed from there. And they never bothered to find out if his contention was ever proven or verified or whether it was debunked. And it was debunked 5 ways from Sunday from 1932 on. No, 1931. I mean, he comes up with this thing in 27. There's no safe dose. And in 31, it was proven that his methodology was entirely the effects he was creating on the flies was entirely different than what he thought he was creating, because there was a way to look at at the interior of the cells by 1931. And back in 27, when he was working, the only genetic data science that they had was Gregor Mendel's pea plant stuff. No, really, it was. That was the state of the art. It was 60 years old, and it's like, well, have the pea plants grow and see if the flowers are blue or white. And that was as far as genetic science was. And they were trying to get a breakthrough on how do we unlock the secret of evolution and manipulate it. And then they got into let's throw the kitchen sink at some fruit flies. And Muller's aspect of the kitchen sink was radiation. And what he was doing is he was blasting them with such high doses that he was damaging whole sections of DNA. Nobody knew at the time because they couldn't see what was going on. They could just see whether the fly babies had weird wings or 5 eyes or 2 eyes or whatever. You know, it was sort of like AI. We don't know what the computer's doing, but we put this thing in this end and something comes out that end, and oh boy, howdy, look at that, you know, and they don't know how it works. Anyway, Barbara McClintock came up with a way of staining the interior cells. And in 1931, she's like, look, he's blowing big holes in these chromosomes. Of course, the fly babies are coming out weird. And so he got debunked at a conference in front of all these geneticists right before he was going to speak. A guy named Louis Stadler got up with McClintock's slides and goes, look, Muller's blowing holes in the chromosomes. That's why he's getting these weird reactions. And then Muller had to get up and speak after that. So 2 weeks later, he tried to commit suicide. He used the wrong dose and he survived.
Wow.
Oh, it's true. It's a true story. Yeah. Anyway, so Muller was a grad student who threw 130 million times background dose at flies and got them to have weird looking kids. You think he would stop and go, wait a minute, 130 million times background dose, should I even be bothering with this? How does this prove of damage at low doses?
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, eat these 15 bottles of aspirin and we'll see how you're doing. You know, oh my God, don't take one aspirin because look what happened to this guy. That's how irrational his thought process was. I don't, you know, it still astonishes me that people are like, oh yeah, 100 million times you got an effect. Oh yeah, that probably happens here at like 1 time or 2 times. You know, it's just like, why would you think that? What other branch of, other than math, what other branch of biology, biological science, life science has a straight linear relationship? You can take all sorts of toxins at a certain level and you're fine. You know, look what Rasputin did, for God's sake, you know.
We do that every day.
And we do that every day.
Just by living on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Vitamin A.
Welcome.
Yeah, vitamin A and D are toxic at high levels.
Of course, anything is toxic at high levels. Eat 18 pounds of beef in one sitting.
Everything.
I mean, and so that's what Muller was doing. He was like 130 million times. Oh, that got it, man. That fly looks weird. So I have a breakthrough. Okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Pretty much all healthy bodies have very minute amounts of arsenic in our bodies because it's natural. It's in the environment.
We produce formaldehyde in our cells.
Oops.
You know.
Sorry.
And so this absolutism is the weird part about, that's what I think is the most bizarre thing about this, is the absolutism, the black and white-ism, particularly in the biological sciences. And so it's like, where did this absolutism come from? That's, I mean, the thing that I'm still mystified is like, they just flipped out and went absolute, and there's no absolutes in this universe. There are asymptotes where you get closer and closer by having the distance, you know, but
There's a lot of data when you try that. But anyways, I was going to joke about Tylenol, but because we're getting to the same absolutism here, is the tiniest bit of Tylenol makes autism, and autism is a whole monolithic category. But no, it's actually incredibly diverse. It's a layering of multiple conditions. It's so irrational and irresponsible to try to blame it on a single cause like acetaminophen. Tylenol.
Well, there's so much going on at the cellular level, for God's sake. I mean, and the amount of DNA repair that's happening in a living cell is ridiculous. There's an average of 10,000 DNA repairs in each cell each day. All right. That's just like about I'm sure there's less interior of the body or exterior of the body, whatever, but there is a lot of repair. It's almost continual. And each cell has 2 meters of DNA if you stretch it all out. So there's a busy little bees going around there, constantly keeping these strands of DNA in repair. And if DNA was so damn delicate that if you glance at it sideways with radiation, it gets all, we literally physically actually would not be here having this conversation.
And let's get to the point of that. Not
Okay.
being here to have this conversation. What is the fallout of the fraud around this true crime drama?
Well, I think the principal fallout is people have been a lot too many people have been convinced that nuclear is a fate worse than global warming, and that they would rather like take their chances with wind and solar and batteries and hope for the best. Because we can't use nuclear because, oh my God, look what happened to Hiroshima. Well, number one, that was a bomb. And number two, have you seen Hiroshima lately? I mean, they're fine, and so, yes, it was awful. And I'm not trying to justify it in the least. But the point being is radiation is looked at as an absolute, and there are no absolutes. And where did this absolutism come in? Possibly it was a eugenics sort of a concept. We can't defile the genetics of man, therefore we must be pure.
I have had
whatever.
people give me that exact argument as late as 2017.
That's just so amazing. Well, you better not have a granite countertop or eat bananas. I mean, how absolute there are no absolutes. And that's the weird thing about that. In a belief system, there are absolutes. In science, in biological science, there are no absolutes.
Funny story.
And
well, let me get this funny story. The person who told me that lives in a neighborhood where 2 years later, right here, First Hill, Seattle, Washington, we had a nuclear contamination. No one activated around that contamination. No one.
What do you mean activated around the? I mean, no one was out there marching.
Yep. None of these anti-nuclear politicians who are trying to shut down our closest plant 300 miles away said a word about the contamination that was almost unleashed from a hospital on First Hill.
Well, what do you attribute that to? The lack of response.
It is not nearly as exciting when a nuclear accident actually happens. It is a bigger myth. It is a bigger scare tactic when it is not in front of your face.
It happened in a hospital too, not a nuclear power plant.
But it happened.
That's an interesting
point. That's true. Yeah, it wasn't at the target of their ire. That is absolutely true. And the practical danger is so much higher because of the population density, because of the delayed response, because there's not fewer alarms. We're so regulated in the nuclear industry. We don't hold the handrail and we get written up. We don't use a ladder correctly and you have a problem. You have a corrective action that you got to do when there is the slightest mistake, but it is not a target of the ire unless it's energy.
Well, that to your point. I mean, nuclear medicine has gotten a free pass all along, and they're using the same. I think people just have some fundamental lack of knowledge here. Like they seem to equate low dose radiation with a virus. You get one smidgen and you're doomed, because the virus proliferates, whereas a radiation doesn't proliferate. If it causes cancer, then that will proliferate.
There's a mythology around that we even saw with the HBO dramatization of Chernobyl. was the idea that this infection was spread from the firefighter to his pregnant wife.
Exactly.
Like it was
exactly.
a virus.
That's what I was saying, is that uninformed or misinformed people tend to equate radiation with, like, it's like a subatomic Ebola. Therefore, like Helen Caldicott, one atom of plutonium and you're dead. It's like, well, I guess if it was exactly at the right place in my lung or whatever, but the chances of that are almost infinitesimal. I mean, you can walk outside and get hit by a meteor. So you're going to have a 5-inch steel roof and stay indoors all your life?
Yeah. Not only is it infinitesimal, but it is impossible to verify.
Yes. And that's because of my earlier point. There's so much going on with the cell. There's so much toxic stuff and DNA damage stuff going on inside each individual cell that when you get down to that level, it is utterly impossible to determine if low dose radiation is causing an effect on a cell as distinct from, like, oxidation. Because the repair mechanism is precisely the same. And unless you can isolate the cell from everything, which you can't, because there's cells next door and they're doing their thing, like spitting out formaldehyde or whatever, And so it can't be done in isolation. So these do these. And so it's sort of like a cellular epidemiological study, and it's just, you can't get data that you can't drill down that far because the effects from different causes all look exactly the same. And so you have to isolate the cell from every other effect and do one effect at a time. And you can't do that with living tissue. If we have all the energy we need 24/7 carbon free for thousands of years, that's got to be a better position than we're in now. Maybe I'm being optimistic by just throw energy at it. But what else are you going to do? Power down? Because that's what the wind and solar people are. They're trying to back away from combustion instead of going beyond combustion to fission.
Yeah, the same argument we had 40 years ago, that we don't need nuclear. We can survive off of efficiency. We can survive off conservation. We can survive if we just use less, buy less, consume less, go without meat, go without driving, just be a better person and you'll save the world. That is the usual consumer guilt-driven solution to climate. And it is also anti-systematic. It is anti-collaboration, anti-community to say we cannot do this as a society.
It's counterproductive.
Yes.
Well.
It's incredibly destructive to the idea of communal power causing change.
Well, but my take on all this power down stuff is it's inimical to human nature, and you're not going to engineer it out of the species in the time that we feel that we have to do something. You're not going to turn 8 billion people into a bunch of vegans. So you can eliminate the carbon of growing all this meat, which I fully acknowledge is an issue. It's all about it gets back to the perfectibility of man myth. Which the eugenics people made the same mistake, but in a different way. The people like Amory Lovins, they're all like, well, we need to use less energy. Well, you're not going to convince people to do that. You're somebody in a Chicago apartment that's 40 degrees out in the apartment and 20 below outside. You're not going to convince them to not turn on their furnace.
It's mission impossible. Even assuming everybody was that vegan, it's still mission impossible. Because you got to electrify everything if you want to solve the climate problem.
Well, and that's why I think the most feasible way of electrifying everything, if you were to strive to that goal, the best way to get to that goal, whether you'd reach it or not, is nuclear power, simply because it's so energy dense and is carbon free. And even if you include the carbon from building the plant, it's 11 grams per kilowatt. If you don't include the carbon from building the plant, it's 6 grams per kilowatt because of the mining, which can be electrified. And with seawater uranium, you don't have the mining, so you probably get down to 1 or 2 grams per kilowatt.
If
You
you
know,
include laser enrichment, something we've covered on this
see,
program,
that stuff is scary. That stuff is scary. I mean, yeah, you could include
super
laser
efficient.
enrichment.
You'll
Yeah, but
you'll
it's
get
super.
down
Yeah.
to like less than 1 gram. It is absolutely like already with CANDU reactors, you get extremely low, much lower than 7, much lower than 5, I think. It is the worst case scenario. The very worst data they have to throw at us, it's 11 grams. And that's why folks like Mark Jacobson will lie and create figures like 30 and 60 and say it's from the burning cities of nuclear war where the
Oh,
carbon comes from.
I eviscerate him in the book about that. In fact, he might try to sue me after all this crap. But basically, I mean, he just has a lot of bullshit ideas. And well, just one thing, his build out schedule is just, it's hallucinatory. Is that the word, or is it hallucinatory? I mean, he is looking at 9.66 billion full size panels. Now he doesn't say that in his thing. We had to dig through it and add it all up because he shies away. He does not lay out what it's going to take. 394,400 wind turbines, 5 megawatts each.
5
His
megawatts is a big
panel
turbine.
replacement rate would be 460,000 panels each day. Forever. And so you add up his program and it's just silly.
We could have a whole program trashing Mark Jacobson for
we
probably the
will.
5th time. Yeah,
We already
we
have.
should. We've done it
Probably
so many
already
times. Well, getting back to we are
LNT?
over time, and so
So
we want to give you more chances to tell us other projects you're working on, where you're at, where you're headed. We want to give you time to talk about things other than our primary category. Thank you for being a guest with us
sure.
today.
Roadmap to Nowhere, I'm finishing the manuscript. We hope to have it out next summer. So then we'll have 3 books, Earth's Nuclear Planet, LNT Report, and Roadmap to Nowhere. They comprise a basic education in the broad field that the nuclear industry, the nuclear community has their focus on, And so it's like, read these books and now you'll be up to speed on all this groovy stuff we're talking about. Okay. The 4th book I want to write is called Power to the Planet. And that depends on the success of a certain friend of mine who is in the midst of trying to get some pretty highfalutin contracts to do some pretty highfalutin nuclear stuff. Should he be successful, I am going to ride along. And I liken it to Hunter S. Thompson joining the Hells Angels and writing about it from the inside. It's going to involve power and isotope fabrication, or however you want to call it, and seawater uranium extraction, and all sorts of groovy stuff this person has the possibility of doing. And should it come to fruition, I'll be there writing about it. The way Tom Wolfe wrote about the right stuff, the way Hunter Thompson wrote about the Hells Angels, is like, you're going to get from the inside, what's it like to build a reactor? What's it like to harvest seawater uranium, et cetera? And then power the reactor that you built with seawater uranium and then get isotopes out of it and all that cool stuff I'll be writing about from the inside.
Wonderful. I genuinely hope to see the product and the book succeed. We need every tool.
Cool.
We need every tool in the toolkit to fix this.
Yeah.
Thank you, our viewers, for watching today. This has been the Ecomodernist channel live. Please find us right here on YouTube at Ecomodernist1. That's at Ecomodernist1 or the Ecomodernist channel. You can find us on Facebook, the Ecomodernist Society of North America. You can find us on Patreon. Please support us on Patreon, the Ecomodernist channel. You can also find us rebroadcast many places on my personal media. I'm Soyaddle on Twitch, soyaddle.tv, Carl Alex Pauls on x.com, Carl Alex Pauls on LinkedIn, and you can find us online at esna.earth. That's esna.earth. Remember, missions first, peace and justice will follow.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, Ecomodernist channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, Ecomodernist Society of North America.
And online at https://esna.earth.